and welcome back to my channel, and in this video we're going to be talking about what address you should use for your registered address when you're setting up a community interest company. So this is an important video, and even for some of you who've already set up your community interest companies, here is a few considerations about possibly changing the registered address. So in this video I'm going to be covering the topics of hiding your personal residential address off the internet, because we don't want that on the internet for safety reasons and for privacy reasons. Two, how that address actually impacts you getting local grant funding. So these are two really important issues that you need to be considering when it comes to looking at your registered address for your CIC. So before I get into all of that, please hit the subscribe button for everything to do with community interest companies, grant funding and social enterprises. If you want to dive in a bit deeper than this YouTube channel, go over to my website. I've got a brilliant membership on there, and I've also got my CIC course, which is how to set up CIC and get grant funded in 4 months. It's been going for 2 years now. Over 500 people have done it. It's a great course. It's everything you need to set up your CIC. So registered address. You will be asked for this when you set up your CIC on Companies House. Now, your registered address is the one that will be attached to your CIC, and it is public. Now, what happens is a lot of CIC owners, of course, when they're setting up, they're individual people. They often don't have an office address or any kind of commercial premises, so they often will use their home address. Now, you don't want to do that because it is then public on the internet, on Companies House. Anybody could look it up. One, you could end up, God forbid, you end up with a stalker or something like that, or someone that's got some kind of vendetta against you. You know, when today we're dealing with the public, we're dealing with communities, and sometimes we're dealing with some vulnerable people. So that can have consequences. You don't want your personal address on there. Also, as a director, at any point, you might want to resign as a director. And also then you don't really want your personal address attached to a company that might be closing. So there are all sorts of reasons why you don't really want that on the internet. So what you should do is have a different address that isn't your home address. Now, it's okay just to put your home address as your director's address. So on Companies House, you've got your registered address, and then you've got your director's home address. Obviously, that does have to be your actual home address, your residential address, but that is not public. So do be rest assured that your residential address, when you write it down, when they ask for the director's home address, that is not public. That is not on the internet. That's just private. Only Companies House can see that. So rest assured that's okay. And if you don't put your real home address, then Companies House will actually reject the application. So if you think, oh, I don't want to put my real home address when I put my director's home address, I'm going to put like my accountant or something, it will be cancelled. So it really does have to be your real residential home address. So that's the director's address, but let's go back to the registered company address. So what would you use if you don't use your home address? Well, the best thing to do is get a local address. Now, a lot of people will go off and get a virtual address. Now, a virtual address is when you've got a company that does like a mail service where they will take your mail in, you can use the address, they will scan or post you the mail that you get. So that's a virtual address, and you usually pay a monthly fee. And there's scores of these on the internet, so you can go and have a look at those. They totally range in cost, maybe £10 to £30 a month. That's usually the sort of standard rate that you would pay for a virtual address. But here's the next consideration. Say you're in Wales, your community interest company is going to be based in Wales, and you use a London address for your virtual address. That's no good because you're running your project in Wales. That will affect your grant funding. It means you won't be able to get your local grant pots of funding. That is make or break. So you don't want that. So factor that in. You don't want a central London address. I would even argue if you're in London, you shouldn't get a central London Mayfair address, because even then the grant funders will look at postcodes. So if you're in Peckham or Brixton, you should really get an address for Peckham and Brixton, not a Mayfair address. So just factor that in, because you want to be able to get your local funding, especially if you're based in a deprived area. You want to make sure you're getting grant funding that's for that area. And it is like a postcode system. So the grant funders will look at postcodes. They have a list of postcodes, they have a list of deprived areas, and they will choose grant funding applications that are from those areas. So you might be thinking at this point, okay, that sounds great, but like, say I'm in Brixton, how am I going to get an address? I can't see any virtual addresses in Brixton because of all these companies are in central London. Like, what am I going to do? So here's my next suggestion. I suggest that you speak to some of the charities in your local area, some of the community buildings in your local area. So I've had students and they have gone to a local charity and they have said, look, can I make a donation and use your address as my postal address? And they have paid a donation of £100 for the year and they have allowed them to use the address for their CIC. So that is one way to get around that rule so that you are able to base yourself in your actual community. You're also benefiting possibly by giving donation to also a good cause and your local community and a charity in your community, which is a good thing to do. And then you're avoiding that issue of getting excluded for funding because of the postcode system. Go and ask your local charities, local community centres. Often they don't advertise for this. You have to go and ask. So go and ask them if you can use their address. So that's my advice on what to use for your registered CIC address. I hope that was useful. Any questions, drop them in the comments.